The spring of 1845 brought a particularly harsh rain to Thornridge Manor. The weathered stone gargoyles that guarded the estate's perimeter seemed to weep as water cascaded from their grotesque faces. Inside the grand manor, the atmosphere was equally cold and unwelcoming despite the fires burning in the ornate hearths. Eleanor Thorne stood by the window in the drawing-room, her slender fingers nervously tracing patterns on the condensation that had formed on the glass. At 23, Eleanor was considered a spinster by society's cruel standards. Her plain muslin dress hung modestly on her slight frame, its dove-grey colour reflecting her subdued nature. Her chestnut hair was pulled back in a simple chignon, with a few tendrils escaping to frame her heart-shaped face. Though she possessed a quiet beauty, it was often overlooked due to her reserved demeanour. "Eleanor, do stand up straight. Lord and Lady Pembroke will arrive at any moment, and I will not have you embarrassing us with your perpetual slouching," her mother, Mrs. Victoria Thorne, admonished as she adjusted the floral arrangement on the centre table for the third time. Eleanor immediately corrected her posture, feeling the familiar tightness in her chest that always accompanied social gatherings. She had lived by one immutable belief since childhood. Words were dangerous weapons that could wound deeply, or, worse still, reveal too much of oneself. Silence was safety. Silence was protection. As the youngest of three daughters in a family of dwindling fortune, Eleanor had watched her elder sisters make advantageous matches, leaving her alone with parents who viewed her as their last chance to secure financial stability. Her father's investments in a failed railway venture had left them clinging precariously to respectability, making her marriage prospects all the more critical. "They've brought their nephew with them," her father announced, entering the room with the day's newspaper tucked under his arm. Lord Langston Grayson, the Duke of Westmoreland, recently returned from diplomatic service abroad. Unmarried and exceedingly wealthy. "How fortunate," her mother replied, shooting Eleanor a meaningful glance. "Eleanor, you will make conversation with the Duke. No hiding in corners or pretending fascination with the bookshelves." Eleanor nodded obediently, though panic fluttered in her stomach. Make conversation, she who had been mocked throughout her life for her quietness, her hesitation to speak, her thoughtful pauses that society deemed as dullness. The familiar refrain from her school days echoed in her mind. "Silent Eleanor, empty-headed Eleanor, has nothing worth saying at all." The distant sound of carriage wheels on gravel announced their visitor's arrival. Eleanor took a deep breath, steeling herself for the inevitable awkwardness that would follow. She watched from the window as the elegant carriage bearing the Westmoreland crest came to a halt at the entrance. The footman opened the carriage door, and Eleanor caught her first glimpse of the Duke of Westmoreland as he stepped down. He was taller than she expected, broad-shouldered and imposing in his perfectly tailored black coat. His movements were precise and confident as he assisted his aunt and uncle from the carriage. Even from a distance, Eleanor could sense a commanding presence that made her retreat further into herself. "They're here," she whispered, more to herself than to her parents. The butler announced the arrival of Lord and Lady Pembroke, accompanied by His Grace, the Duke of Westmoreland. Eleanor stood beside her parents in the receiving line, her eyes lowered demurely to the floor as they entered. "Victoria, how lovely to see you again," Lady Pembroke exclaimed, kissing both of Mrs. Thorne's cheeks. "And this must be your youngest daughter. Come forward, child, let me look at you." Eleanor stepped forward with a practiced curtsy, feeling the weight of scrutiny upon her. "This is Eleanor, our youngest," her mother said proudly, as if Eleanor were a prized mare at auction. "Charmed," Lady Pembroke said, though her expression suggested otherwise. "Allow me to introduce my nephew, Langston Grayson, the Duke of Westmoreland." Eleanor raised her eyes slowly, meeting the Duke's gaze for the first time. She had expected coldness, perhaps disdain, but instead found herself looking into eyes the color of a stormy sea, intense yet somehow warm. His features were aristocratic, a strong jaw, straight nose, and well-defined cheekbones framed by dark hair with a slight wave. A small scar ran along his right temple, adding character to what might otherwise have been too perfect a face. "Miss Thorne," he said, his voice deep and resonant. He bowed slightly, taking her gloved hand and bringing it briefly to his lips in a formal greeting. Eleanor felt her cheeks warm. "Your Grace," she managed, her voice barely audible. She cursed herself inwardly for her weakness. An awkward silence followed as they moved to the sitting room for tea. Elena took her place beside her mother on the settee, while the Duke sat across from them in a high-backed chair that seemed to pale in comparison to his presence. "I understand you've been abroad, Your Grace, Mr. Thorne began, attempting to initiate conversation. "Yes, diplomatic service in Vienna and briefly in Constantinople," the Duke replied. "I've only recently returned to England to attend to estate matters following my father's passing." "Our condolences, Mrs. Thorne said. The late Duke was highly regarded. Elena listened as they discussed politics, the social season, and local gossip. She noticed how the Duke's responses were measured and thoughtful, never speaking without purpose. When a lull in the conversation arose, all eyes turned expectantly to Elena. "And what interests occupy your time, Miss Thorne?" the Duke asked directly. Elena felt her throat constrict. I enjoy reading, Your Grace," she said softly, the words feeling inadequate as they left her lips. "Reading." "How quaint," Lady Pembroke remarked with a dismissive wave. "Though I suppose it's a harmless enough pastime for a young lady with no particular talents." The Duke's expression remained neutral, but Elena noticed a slight tightening around his eyes. "What sort of books capture your attention?" he pressed, ignoring his aunt's comment. Elena hesitated, knowing that honesty might invite further ridicule. Ladies of quality were expected to read romantic poetry or devotional texts, not the historical and philosophical works that lined her shelves. "I have varied interests," she said diplomatically. Her mother laughed nervously. "Elena is being modest. She plays the pianoforte beautifully. Perhaps you might favor us with a performance later, dear." Before Elena could respond, the conversation shifted again. She retreated back into silence, relieved to no longer be the center of attention, yet feeling strangely disappointed at having missed an opportunity to engage with the Duke more meaningfully. As tea progressed, Elena found the Duke's gaze returning to her periodically, as if trying to solve a puzzle. Each time their eyes met, she quickly looked away, unnerved by the intensity of his attention. After tea, the party moved to the music room as her mother had suggested. Elena sat at the pianoforte, her fingers trembling slightly as she began to play. She had selected a piece by Mozart, technically challenging but not overly showy. As she played, she lost herself in the music, allowing it to express what her voice could not. When the final notes faded, she was startled by the sound of applause. She turned to find the Duke standing near the pianoforte, his expression thoughtful. "You play with remarkable sensitivity, Miss Thorne," he said. "It seems you found a voice through your music." Elena was struck by his perception. "Thank you, Your Grace. Music often expresses what words cannot." It was the longest sentence she had spoken all afternoon, and she saw a flicker of surprise, and perhaps approval in his eyes. "Indeed," he replied. "Though I wonder what thoughts you keep so carefully guarded behind your silence." Before she could formulate a response, Lady Pembroke interrupted, calling the Duke away to discuss some matter regarding their estate. Elena was left at the pianoforte, her heart racing from their brief exchange. The visit concluded shortly afterward, with promises of future engagements. As the carriage departed, Elena stood once again at the window, watching until it disappeared from view. "Well," her mother said, "that went as well as could be expected, considering your inability to maintain even the simplest conversation. Thank goodness for your musical ability, or the Duke would think you completely witless." Elena absorbed the criticism silently, as she always did. But for the first time, she wondered if perhaps her silence had been noticed for what it truly was, not emptiness, but depth. The following week brought an unexpected invitation from Lady Pembroke to attend a small garden party at their estate, Pembroke Hall. The note specifically mentioned the Duke would be in attendance and wished to continue their discussion about literature. Elena read the invitation twice, certain there must be some mistake. "This is exactly the opportunity we needed," her mother declared, already planning Elena's ensemble. "The Duke has shown interest despite your reticence. You must make an effort, Elena. Our family's future depends upon it." The burden of expectation weighed heavily on Elena as they traveled to Pembroke Hall 3 days later. The estate was magnificent, with manicured gardens stretching toward a lake that glimmered in the afternoon sun. Guests milled about the lawns, the ladies' colorful gowns creating a kaleidoscope against the green landscape. Elena, dressed in a pale blue gown that her mother insisted brought out her eyes, felt conspicuous among the fashionable crowd. She clutched her parasol like a shield, wishing she could disappear into the hedgerows. "Miss Thorne," a familiar voice called. She turned to find the Duke approaching, looking even more handsome in daylight. "I'm pleased you could attend." "Your Grace," she curtsied, struggling to maintain her composure. "Thank you for the invitation." "Would you care to walk with me?" he asked, offering his arm. "The rose garden is particularly fine this time of year." Aware of her mother's eager gaze, Elena placed her gloved hand lightly on his arm. They strolled away from the main gathering, the watchful eyes of society following their progress with undisguised interest. "I've been thinking about our brief conversation," the Duke said as they entered the rose garden. "You mentioned that music expresses what words cannot. I found that observation quite profound." Elena was startled by his candor. "Most people find my silence frustrating," she admitted. "I find it intriguing," he countered. "In my diplomatic work, I learned that those who speak least often have the most to say." His understanding awakened something in Elena, a dangerous hope that perhaps someone might value her thoughts rather than dismissing them. "May I speak plainly, Miss Thorne?" She nodded, both fearful and curious. "Society, I've found, rewards those who fill silences with empty chatter while punishing those who wait until they have something meaningful to contribute. I prefer the latter." Elena studied him, searching for signs of mockery but finding none. "I was teased mercilessly as a child for my quietness," she confessed. "My school companions called me Empty Elena and insisted I had no thoughts worth expressing." "Children can be cruel," he said, "as can adults, though they disguise it better beneath layers of civility." "I learned that silence was safer than risking ridicule," she continued, surprised by her own openness. "Eventually, it became habit." They paused beside a bush heavy with cream-colored roses. The Duke reached out, carefully breaking off a perfect bloom and offering it to Elena. "Some things of beauty reveal themselves slowly," he said. "Like roses that must be coaxed into bloom." Elena accepted the rose, their fingers brushing briefly. "And some things wither before they ever have the chance to blossom," she replied softly. Their eyes met, and Elena felt a current of understanding pass between them. For the first time in her life, her silence felt like a choice rather than a prison. The moment was interrupted by Lady Pembroke's arrival, accompanied by a striking blonde woman in an elaborate emerald gown. "Langston, dear, I've been searching everywhere for you," Lady Pembroke said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Lady Cecilia Huntington has just arrived and was asking after you specifically." The beautiful woman stepped forward, placing her hand possessively on the Duke's arm where Elena's had been moments before. "Langston, you promised me the first dance," she pouted prettily. "Don't tell me you've forgotten." Elena immediately withdrew, feeling foolish for having thought herself special. Of course the Duke would have more appropriate prospects, women of beauty, wealth, and social grace. "Miss Thorne, have you met Lady Cecilia?" the Duke asked, his expression unreadable. "I haven't had the pleasure," Elena said, forcing herself to meet Lady Cecilia's dismissive gaze. "Lady Cecilia is the daughter of the Earl of Doncaster," Lady Pembroke explained. "She and my nephew have known each other since childhood." "Practically betrothed since the cradle," Lady Cecilia added with a tinkling laugh. "Though Langston insists on playing the field before settling down, don't you, darling?" The Duke's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I believe the musicians are beginning, Lady Cecilia. We should join the others." He turned to Elena with a formal bow. "Will you be joining the dancing, Miss Thorne?" "I'm afraid not, Your Grace," she replied, retreating behind her customary wall of reserve. "I find I have a slight headache. Please excuse me." She walked away, clutching the rose he had given her, its petals already beginning to droop in the afternoon heat. The remainder of the garden party passed in a blur. Elena maintained a polite distance, watching as the Duke danced with Lady Cecilia and conversed with various guests. Occasionally their eyes would meet across the lawn, and she would quickly look away, ashamed of her disappointment. As their carriage carried them home, her mother launched into an assessment of the afternoon. The Duke paid you particular attention, but then you disappeared. Lady Cecilia is clearly a rival, but she's known to be fickle in her affections. You must be more assertive, Eleanor. Eleanor gazed out the window at the passing countryside. I believe the Duke was merely being polite, Mother. Lady Cecilia seems a much more suitable match. Nonsense, I saw how he looked at you. But you must give him something to look at. Your silence may be mysterious for a time, but eventually a man wants conversation from his wife. The words his wife echoed in Eleanor's mind, both thrilling and terrifying her. Could she possibly be a duchess? The very thought was absurd, yet the memory of their conversation in the rose garden lingered, awakening a yearning she had long suppressed. 2 days later, a messenger arrived at Thornridge Manor with an invitation. The Duke of Westmoreland requested the pleasure of Miss Eleanor Thorne's company for a carriage ride the following afternoon, with her parents' permission. Her mother was ecstatic, already envisioning wedding bells and financial security. Her father, more practical, reminded them not to get ahead of themselves. The Duke has responsibilities to his title and estate. He cannot marry solely for preference. But he has shown preference, her mother insisted. And Eleanor has excellent bloodlines, even if our current circumstances are modest. Eleanor listened to them discuss her future as if she weren't present, a familiar experience. But internally she was struggling with conflicting emotions. The Duke intrigued her, challenged her in ways no one ever had. Yet she had seen the elegant Lady Cecilia, heard the whispers of their childhood connection. Why would he choose silent Eleanor Thorne when he could have a glittering socialite? Nevertheless, the following afternoon found her dressed in her best riding habit, waiting nervously in the foyer. When the Duke's carriage arrived, she was surprised to see him driving it himself rather than sending a servant. "Miss Thorne," he greeted her, descending to help her into the carriage. "I thought we might drive to Millbrook Valley. The views are exceptional this time of year." The valley was a few miles distant, known for its wildflower meadows and ancient oak trees. It was a public enough location to be proper, yet private enough for conversation. As they set off, Eleanor found herself uncharacteristically nervous. The Duke handled the horses with ease, his strong hands confident on the reins. "I must apologize for my aunt's interruption yesterday," he said, after they had traveled some distance. "She has strong opinions about my social obligations." "There's no need for apology," Eleanor replied carefully. "Lady Cecilia seems lovely." He glanced at her, a wry smile touching his lips. "Lovely, yes. We've known each other since we were children. Our families have always assumed an eventual match." "And yet you haven't married," Eleanor observed, then immediately blushed at her boldness. "I've spent much of my adult life abroad," he explained, "and I find I'm not particularly inclined to fulfill expectations simply because they exist." They reached the valley, where he halted the carriage at a scenic overlook. The view was indeed spectacular, rolling hills dotted with wildflowers stretching to the horizon. He assisted her down from the carriage, his hands firm at her waist. They walked to a fallen log that served as a natural bench, maintaining a proper distance between them. "May I ask you something, Miss Thorne?" "Of course," she replied, though trepidation filled her. "Why did you truly decline to dance yesterday? Was it truly a headache or something else?" The directness of his question caught her off guard. Eleanor considered deflecting, but found herself unwilling to retreat into falsehood. I don't dance well," she admitted. "My instructors always said I overthink the steps. Another opportunity for mockery I prefer to avoid." "I see." He plucked a wildflower from beside the log, twirling it between his fingers. "What if there were no one to mock you? What would you do differently?" The question penetrated to the heart of her fears. "I'm not sure I know who I would be without the constant fear of judgment," she confessed. "It has shaped me for so long." "Then perhaps it's time to discover that person," he suggested. "The Eleanor Thorne who speaks her mind without fear." "Why do you care?" The question escaped before she could reconsider. He seemed surprised by her directness. "Because in the brief moments you've allowed yourself to speak freely, I've glimpsed a mind that intrigues me deeply. I find myself wondering what thoughts you keep so carefully guarded." His honesty disarmed her. Most would not consider that a desirable quality in a woman, she said. I am not most men, Miss Thorne. No, she thought, he certainly was not. The Duke of Westmoreland was unlike anyone she had ever known, perceptive, thoughtful, and seemingly immune to society's expectations. Tell me something true, he requested suddenly, something you've never told another soul. Eleanor hesitated, then decided to take a risk. I write, she said softly. Not just letters or diary entries, but essays and observations on philosophy and politics. I keep them hidden beneath a loose floorboard in my room. His expression remained serious, respectful of her confession. Why hide them? My father once caught me reading political treatises. He said no man wants a wife whose mind is occupied with matters beyond her sphere, that I would never marry if I persisted in such inappropriate interests. Your father is wrong, the Duke said simply. A mind is too valuable a thing to be constrained by arbitrary boundaries. Eleanor felt something shift within her, a crack in the wall she had built around herself. What about you, Your Grace? What truth do you conceal? He considered her question, his gaze moving to the distant hills. I find the responsibilities of my title suffocating at times, he admitted. Everyone has expectations of what a duke should be, how he should act, whom he should marry. I sometimes envy the freedom of common men. Yet you have power they do not, Eleanor observed. Power that comes with golden chains, he countered. Every decision I make affects countless lives. It's a burden I never asked for but cannot relinquish. They sat in companionable silence for several minutes, each contemplating the other's revelation. Eleanor felt a curious lightness, as if sharing her secret had physically unburdened her. We should return, the Duke said finally, rising and offering his hand, though I find myself reluctant to end our conversation. Eleanor accepted his hand, feeling the warmth of his skin through her glove. Perhaps we could continue it another time, she suggested, surprising herself with her boldness. I would like that very much, he replied, his smile genuine and warm. As they drove back to Thornridge Manor, Eleanor felt a cautious hope blossoming. Perhaps she had found someone who valued her mind rather than fearing it. Yet doubt lingered. She was still plain, quiet Eleanor Thorne, and he was a duke with responsibilities to his title and estate. Whatever connection they had formed might be pleasant diversion for him, but nothing more. Her mother was waiting eagerly when they returned, inviting the Duke in for refreshments. He declined politely, citing a previous engagement but requesting permission to call again soon. You've made quite an impression, her mother said after he had departed, though I can't imagine what you found to talk about for so long. Eleanor smiled mysteriously. We managed to find common ground. That evening, she wrote in her hidden journal, attempting to capture the feelings the Duke had awakened in her. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a life where she need not hide her thoughts or measure her words, a life where she might be valued for her mind rather than despite it. Her peaceful contemplation was shattered the next morning when her mother burst into her room, clutching the latest edition of the London Gazette. Disaster, Mrs. Thorne wailed, thrusting the paper at Eleanor. Read it. Eleanor scanned the society pages until her eyes landed on the item that had so distressed her mother. It is rumoured that an announcement is imminent regarding the engagement of His Grace, the Duke of Westmoreland, to Lady Cecilia Huntington, daughter of the Earl of Doncaster. Sources close to both families indicate preparations are already underway for what promises to be the social event of the season. The words blurred before Eleanor's eyes. She had been a fool to think the Duke had any serious interest in her. Their conversations, which had seemed so meaningful, were merely a diversion while he finalized arrangements with his more appropriate match. What did you say to him? Her mother demanded. You must have done something to drive him away. I was simply myself, Eleanor replied quietly, folding the newspaper and placing it aside with trembling hands. Well, that was clearly the wrong approach, her mother snapped. Now our last chance at financial security is gone. Eleanor retreated into the refuge of silence once more, but this time it brought no comfort. The Duke's words echoed in her mind. Tell me something true. Had anything about their interactions been true, or was she merely an amusing distraction from his real life and responsibilities? 3 days passed with no word from the Duke. Elena tried to convince herself it was for the best, that the pain of this small heartbreak would fade with time. She returned to her routine, playing the pianoforte, helping her mother with household matters, and writing in her journal when she could steal moments of privacy. On the afternoon of the fourth day, she was in the garden, sketching the rose bushes, when the butler announced a visitor, Lady Cecilia Huntington. Elena's shock must have shown on her face, for Lady Cecilia laughed lightly as she approached. "You seem surprised to see me, Miss Thorne." "I must admit I am," Elena replied, setting aside her sketchbook and rising to curtsy. "To what do I owe the honor?" Lady Cecilia was even more beautiful up close, her golden hair arranged in perfect ringlets, her emerald gown clearly the work of London's finest modiste. She twirled her parasol idly as she regarded Elena with critical eyes. "I wanted to meet the woman who has so captivated Langston," she said. "I must say, you're not what I expected." Elena maintained her composure despite the implied insult. "I'm afraid I don't understand your meaning, Lady Cecilia." "Don't you? Langston has refused to discuss our engagement arrangements. He claims his heart is engaged elsewhere." She gestured dismissively at Elena. "Presumably with you, though I cannot fathom why." Elena's heart leapt at this news, but she refused to show it. "I believe you're mistaken. I read of your impending engagement in the Gazette." Lady Cecilia waved her hand impatiently. "Merely my father's attempt to force Langston's hand. We've been intended for each other since childhood. Our estates adjoin, our bloodlines are impeccable, and together we would be the most powerful couple in England." "Then why are you here?" Elena asked, finally allowing a hint of steel to enter her voice. Lady Cecilia stepped closer, lowering her voice. "To warn you, whatever fancy you've inspired in Langston will pass. Men of his station may dally with unusual women, but they marry where duty dictates." "And if his duty and heart align elsewhere?" Elena challenged, surprising herself with her boldness. Lady Cecilia's beautiful face hardened. "Then you underestimate the influence I and my family wield. One word from my father to yours about certain railway investments gone awry, and your family would be ruined beyond recovery." Elena felt cold dread wash over her. "You're threatening my family." "I'm simply stating facts," Lady Cecilia replied with a predatory smile. "Langston will honor his obligations, as all dukes must. You would be wise to remove yourself from his consideration before you suffer unnecessary embarrassment." She glanced around the modest garden with barely concealed disdain. "After all, what can you possibly offer that I cannot?" With that parting shot, she turned and walked away, leaving Elena standing amid the roses, her sketch forgotten. Elena spent a sleepless night considering Lady Cecilia's words. The threat to her family was clear. If the Duke continued to show interest in her, Lady Cecilia would ensure her father's financial ruin was complete. Yet the possibility that the Duke genuinely cared for her kindled a warmth she couldn't extinguish. The next morning brought another unexpected visitor, the Duke himself. Elena was summoned to the drawing room, where she found him standing by the window, tension evident in his posture. "Your Grace," she greeted him formally, curtsying as protocol demanded. "Miss Thorne," he replied, his expression troubled. "I must apologize for my absence. Matters at the estate required my immediate attention." "There's no need to explain," she said, keeping her voice even despite the tumult of emotions within. "I understand you have many responsibilities." "I understand Lady Cecilia paid you a visit yesterday," he said abruptly. Elena stiffened. "Yes." "May I ask the nature of your conversation?" She considered lying, protecting him from the ugliness of Lady Cecilia's threats, but the memory of their discussion about truth held her to honesty. "She informed me of your long-standing understanding and suggested I remove myself from your consideration." The Duke's expression darkened. "There is no understanding between Lady Cecilia and myself, despite what her family might wish." "What else did she say?" Elena hesitated. "She implied that continued association with me might result in financial hardship for my family." "She threatened you." His voice was dangerously quiet. "She merely pointed out realities I should have recognized myself," Elena replied. "You are a duke. I am the daughter of a gentleman of modest means. Society has expectations for men in your position." Damn society's expectations, he said fiercely, closing the distance between them. I've spent my life fulfilling duties to others. For once, I wish to follow my own heart. Eleanor's breath caught. And where does your heart lead you? His gaze softened as it met hers. To a remarkable woman who hides her brilliance behind silence, a woman whose mind intrigues me as much as her beauty captivates me. Hope bloomed in Eleanor's chest, but fear quickly overshadowed it. Lady Cecilia will not surrender easily. Her family has the power to ruin mine. No one threatens what I hold dear, the Duke said with quiet authority. Not even the Earl of Doncaster. Trust me to handle this, Eleanor. It was the first time he had used her given name, and the intimacy of it warmed her from within. Still, she hesitated, years of caution not easily dismissed. I need time, she said finally. This is all happening so quickly. He nodded, respecting her request. Of course, but know this, I have never met anyone like you, Eleanor Thorne. Behind your silence lies a depth of character I've searched for my entire life. After he departed, Eleanor retreated to her room, her mind whirling with conflicting emotions. Could she trust in the possibility of happiness, or was she setting herself up for devastating disappointment? And even if the Duke's intentions were honorable, could she withstand the scrutiny and judgment that would come with entering his world? 2 days later, an invitation arrived for the Thorne family to attend a ball at Westmoreland House, the Duke's London residence. It was to be the social event of the season, with all of London's elite in attendance. Eleanor's mother was beside herself with excitement, ordering new gowns for both of them and coaching Eleanor on appropriate topics of conversation. This is our opportunity, she declared. If the Duke publicly shows you favor at his own ball, Lady Cecilia's rumors will be dispelled. Eleanor nodded absently, though internally she was terrified. A ball meant dancing, conversation, hundreds of judging eyes. Everything she had spent her life avoiding. The night of the ball arrived, and Eleanor stood before her mirror, hardly recognizing herself. Her gown was midnight blue silk, more elegant than anything she had ever worn. Her hair had been arranged by her mother's lady's maid into an intricate style, adorned with pearl pins, an extravagance her father had reluctantly approved. You look almost pretty, her mother said, adjusting the fall of Eleanor's skirt. Remember to smile, speak clearly, and for heaven's sake, dance if you're asked. The Westmoreland townhouse blazed with light as their carriage approached. Footmen in the Duke's livery lined the entrance, and the sounds of an orchestra drifted from within. Eleanor took a deep breath, steeling herself for the ordeal ahead. As they entered the grand ballroom, Eleanor felt the weight of curious stares. The Duke's interest in her had not gone unnoticed, and speculation ran rampant among the ton. Lady Cecilia was already there, resplendent in a crimson gown that emphasized her statuesque figure, surrounded by admirers. The Duke stood near the entrance, greeting his guests. When he saw Eleanor, his expression brightened visibly. He excused himself from his current conversation and made his way to her side. "Miss Thorne," he said, bowing formally. "You look absolutely breathtaking." Eleanor curtsied, feeling a blush rise to her cheeks. "Thank you, Your Grace. Your home is magnificent." "Allow me to give you a tour," he offered, extending his arm. As they moved through the crowded ballroom, Eleanor was acutely aware of the attention they attracted. Whispers followed in their wake, and she caught fragments of unkind speculation. Plain little thing, family near ruin, what could he possibly see in her? The Duke seemed oblivious to the gossip, or perhaps simply immune to it. He introduced Eleanor to various dignitaries and friends, his hand warm at the small of her back, his pride in her evident to all. Lady Cecilia watched from across the room, her beautiful face marred by a scowl. When the orchestra began playing a waltz, she made her move, approaching with determined grace. "Langston, darling, you promised me the first dance," she said, ignoring Eleanor completely. The Duke's expression remained pleasant, though Eleanor detected a flicker of annoyance. "I believe I promised the first dance to Miss Thorne," he replied smoothly. Eleanor's panic must have shown on her face, for he leaned close to whisper, "Trust me. I won't let you fall." Before she could protest, he had led her to the center of the ballroom. The crowd parted, creating a circle around them as the Duke placed one hand at her waist and took her gloved hand in his. Everyone is watching, Elena whispered, terrified. Then let's give them something worth watching, he replied with a reassuring smile. Just follow my lead. As the music swelled, he guided her into the waltz. Elena's fear of stumbling gradually gave way to the joy of movement as they glided across the floor. The Duke was an excellent dancer, making her feel graceful and secure in his arms. "You're doing beautifully," he murmured as they turned. "Only because you're leading," she replied, but she felt a newfound confidence blooming within her. When the dance ended, applause rippled through the ballroom. The Duke bowed to Elena, his eyes never leaving hers. "Thank you for the honor, Miss Thorne." As other couples took to the floor for the next dance, the Duke guided Elena toward the terrace doors. Some fresh air, perhaps. The ballroom grows warm. The terrace was blessedly quiet compared to the noise within. Stars glittered overhead, and the gardens below were illuminated by strategically placed lanterns. "You've caused quite a stir tonight," the Duke said, his voice warm with approval. "I'm not accustomed to being the center of attention," Elena admitted. "It's rather overwhelming." "Yet you handled it with perfect grace." He turned to face her directly. "Elena, there's something I wish to discuss with you." Her heart began to race. "Yes." Before he could continue, they were interrupted by the arrival of a distinguished-looking older gentleman, accompanied by Lady Cecilia. "Langston, my boy," the man boomed, "you've been neglecting your guests, particularly those most deserving of your attention." "Lord Doncaster," the Duke acknowledged with a formal bow. "I was just having a private word with Miss Thorne." Lord Doncaster barely glanced at Elena. "Yes, I've heard you've been spending time with the Thorne girl, a passing fancy, I trust. We have more important matters to discuss, namely the announcement." Elena felt her stomach drop. Despite the Duke's reassurances, it seemed the engagement rumors had some basis in truth. "There will be no announcement, Lord Doncaster," the Duke said firmly, "as I've made clear to both you and Lady Cecilia numerous times." Lord Doncaster's genial expression hardened. "This is not the venue for such a discussion. But remember your position, Westmoreland. The future of your ducal line is not something to be trifled with for a momentary infatuation." "Father, please," Lady Cecilia interjected, placing a restraining hand on his arm. "Let's not make a scene." She turned a venomous glare on Elena. "Miss Thorne, might I have a word in private?" Elena glanced at the Duke, who gave a slight nod. "I'll be just here," he assured her. Elena followed Lady Cecilia to a more secluded corner of the terrace, bracing herself for another confrontation. "You're making a spectacle of yourself," Lady Cecilia hissed once they were alone. "The ton is laughing behind their fans at the mouse, who thinks she can capture a duke." "I have no designs on the Duke," Elena replied calmly, though her heart raced. "His attention is his to bestow as he chooses." "Do you truly believe he would choose you over me?" Lady Cecilia's laugh was brittle. "Look at us. I am everything a duchess should be, beautiful, accomplished, connected to the highest circles. What are you but a shy, plain nobody whose family teeters on the edge of disgrace?" Each word struck like a physical blow, reinforcing every doubt Elena harbored. Yet something inside her, a new strength nurtured by the Duke's belief in her, refused to be cowed. "Perhaps the Duke values qualities beyond beauty and social standing," she suggested quietly. Lady Cecilia's eyes narrowed dangerously. "You've forgotten my warning. One word from my father to yours about certain financial indiscretions, and your family will be ruined." "Is that truly how you wish to secure a husband?" Elena asked. "Through threats and manipulation? What kind of marriage would result from such a foundation?" "A practical one," Lady Cecilia snapped, "which is all that matters in our world. Love is a luxury few can afford, certainly not a duke with responsibilities to his name and legacy." Their tense exchange was interrupted by a commotion from the ballroom. Lord Doncaster's voice carried clearly, raised in anger. "This is an outrage, after all our families have planned." Elena and Lady Cecilia hurried back to find Lord Doncaster and the Duke engaged in a heated discussion, with a growing circle of onlookers watching the drama unfold. "I have made my position clear," the Duke was saying, his voice controlled but firm. "There will be no engagement between myself and Lady Cecilia. Any rumors to the contrary are false and, I suspect, deliberately propagated." Lord Doncaster's face had turned an alarming shade of red. "You would reject my daughter, the most sought-after woman in London, for that?" He gestured dismissively toward Eleanor, who had just rejoined them. A hush fell over the crowd. Eleanor felt the weight of hundreds of eyes upon her, judging, speculating, pitying. Her instinct was to retreat, to hide behind her familiar shield of silence. But the Duke stood tall, unashamed of his association with her, and his courage inspired her own. "That," the Duke said icily, "is Miss Eleanor Thorne, and you will address her with the respect she deserves." Lord Doncaster sneered. "The daughter of a failed investor who nearly bankrupted half of London, who brings nothing to an alliance but a pretty face, and, from what I hear, precious little conversation." Eleanor felt something snap within her, years of restraint giving way to righteous indignation. Before she could reconsider, she stepped forward, her voice clear and steady as it rang through the suddenly silent ballroom. "You are mistaken, Lord Doncaster, if you believe worth is measured only by wealth or titles. The Duke has shown me that true value lies in character, in integrity, in the courage to defy expectations when they conflict with one's heart." Gasps rippled through the assembled crowd. Lady Cecilia looked as though she had been struck. Even the Duke appeared momentarily stunned before a slow smile spread across his face. "Furthermore," Eleanor continued, finding power in breaking her silence at last, "if you think to intimidate my family with threats of financial exposure, you should know that my father has already made full disclosure of his investment errors to his creditors and established a repayment plan. There is nothing to expose that hasn't already been addressed with honor and responsibility, qualities that, perhaps, not all present here possess in equal measure." Lord Doncaster sputtered indignantly, but the murmurs of the crowd had shifted from scandalized to admiring. Eleanor stood tall, trembling slightly, but refusing to shrink back into her shell of silence. The Duke moved to her side, taking her hand and raising it to his lips in a gesture of public support. "Miss Thorne speaks the truth, with an eloquence that puts us all to shame. I would suggest, Lord Doncaster, that you and Lady Cecilia reconsider your positions. The days of arranging marriages like business mergers are passing. I intend to marry where my heart leads me, regardless of fortune or family connections." The implication of his words was not lost on anyone present. Lady Cecilia's face contorted with rage before she grabbed her father's arm. "Come, father, we are clearly unwelcome here." She swept from the ballroom, her father following in confused indignation. As they departed, the tension broke. The orchestra, sensing the need to restore normality, began playing again. Conversations resumed, though Eleanor knew she and the Duke would be the primary topic. "I believe," the Duke said quietly for her ears alone, "that you have found your voice, Miss Thorne. And a magnificent voice it is." Eleanor smiled, feeling lighter than she had in years. "It seems I needed the right audience." "Would you join me in the library?" he requested. "I find I'm in need of more private conversation." She nodded, and he led her through a side door and down a corridor to a magnificent library. Floor to ceiling, bookshelves lined the walls, filled with leather-bound volumes. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm glow over the comfortable furnishings. Once the door closed behind them, the Duke turned to face Eleanor. "That was the bravest thing I've ever witnessed," he said, his admiration evident. "You were magnificent." Eleanor laughed softly, still giddy with adrenaline. "I'm not entirely sure what came over me. A lifetime of silence, perhaps, demanding to be broken. Whatever inspired it, I'm grateful." He took both her hands in his. "Eleanor, from the moment we met, I sensed there was more to you than others perceived. With each conversation, each glimpse into your mind and heart, I have fallen more deeply under your spell." Eleanor's breath caught. "Your Grace." "Langston, please," he interrupted gently. "If I am to bare my soul to you, at least allow me the intimacy of hearing my name on your lips." "Langston," she amended, the name feeling right and natural. "You must know that any woman would be honored by your attention. Are you certain it's not merely the novelty of my reticence that appeals to you?" He shook his head, his expression serious. "It was your silence that first intrigued me, yes, but it is the depth I discovered beneath that silence that captured my heart. Your intelligence, your compassion, your quiet strength, these are qualities that will never fade with time or familiarity. Society will talk, she warned. The Duke and the nobody. Let them talk, he replied with a dismissive gesture. I've spent too long living according to others' expectations. With you, I feel free to be myself, not the Duke of Westmoreland, but simply Langston Grayson, a man who has finally found what he's been searching for. He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, withdrawing a small velvet box. Eleanor's heart began to race as he dropped to one knee before her. Eleanor Thorne, he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes, you have shown me that true strength often lies in silence, and true courage in breaking that silence when it matters most. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife, not because of titles or expectations, but because I love you, exactly as you are? He opened the box to reveal a stunning sapphire ring surrounded by diamonds. Eleanor gazed at it, then at the man kneeling before her, this remarkable man who had seen value in her when others saw only emptiness. Yes, she said, her voice clear and unwavering. Yes, Langston, I will marry you. Joy blazed across his features as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to pull her into a tender embrace. My quiet, brilliant Eleanor, he murmured. I promise you'll never need to hide your thoughts from me. I may still be quiet at times, she warned, smiling against his shoulder. Old habits die hard. He drew back to gaze into her eyes. Then I shall treasure both your silence and your words, knowing each has its own meaning and value. Their lips met in a kiss that sealed their promise, a duke who had found freedom in love, and a woman who had found her voice in being truly seen and valued for all that she was. When they returned to the ballroom, hand in hand, the duke called for attention. The music faded, and all eyes turned toward them expectantly. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced, his voice carrying easily through the vast space, I am delighted to share with you that Miss Eleanor Thorne has done me the great honor of accepting my proposal of marriage. A moment of stunned silence was followed by a wave of applause, some genuine, some merely polite. Eleanor stood beside her future husband, her head held high. For the first time in her life, she felt no need to retreat from attention, no fear of judgment or mockery. As guests came forward to offer congratulations, Eleanor received them with quiet dignity. She did not suddenly become loquacious, that was not her nature. But when she did speak, her words carried weight and wisdom that impressed even the most skeptical observers. Her mother, tearful with happiness and relief, embraced her. I never thought, a duchess, my Eleanor a duchess. Are you pleased with my accomplishment, mother? Eleanor asked gently, or with my happiness? Mrs. Thorne paused, then smiled with genuine warmth. Both, my dear, definitely both. In the following weeks, as preparations for the wedding began, Eleanor found herself the subject of intense scrutiny. The society papers speculated endlessly about the mysterious Miss Thorne who had captured the Duke's heart. Some stories were kind, others less so, but Eleanor discovered she could weather the attention now that she no longer feared being found wanting. Lady Cecilia and her father departed for their country estate, their social humiliation complete. Rumors suggested they would travel to the continent until the scandal died down. Eleanor felt no triumph in their downfall, only relief that their threats had proved empty. One afternoon, as Eleanor sat with Langston in the garden at Westmoreland House, reviewing plans for their wedding, he presented her with a gift, a beautiful leather-bound journal. For your thoughts, he explained. Whether you choose to share them or keep them private, I want you to know they are valued. Eleanor accepted the journal with a smile. I may share them more often now, she said. I'm discovering the power of my own voice. The voice that enchanted me from the first, he replied, taking her hand. Though I must admit, I'm rather pleased to be the only one who knows just how eloquent you can be in private. Eleanor laughed, a sound that had once been rare but now came more easily. Perhaps I shall always be quiet in crowded ballrooms and lively at home, the best of both worlds. The perfect duchess, Langston agreed, dignified in public, fascinating in private. As they sat together in the fading afternoon light, Eleanor reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had spent a lifetime believing her silence was a deficiency, only to discover it had been a strength all along, allowing her to observe, to think deeply, to form the convictions she now had the courage to express. "What are you thinking about so intently?" Langston asked, stroking her hand. Elena met his gaze with a smile. "I was thinking that sometimes the most powerful words are those that wait patiently to be spoken." "And sometimes," he replied, drawing her close, "the most attentive listeners are rewarded with the most profound truths." Their wedding, held 3 months later at Westminster Abbey, was the social event of the year. Elena wore a gown of ivory silk adorned with seed pearls, looking every inch the duchess she was about to become. As she spoke her vows in a clear, steady voice that carried to the farthest corners of the ancient church, no one would have called her Silent Elena or doubted the depth of her character. The Duke of Westmoreland and his new duchess became known throughout England not only for their obvious devotion to each other, but for their progressive ideas and thoughtful patronage of education and the arts. The Duchess, in particular, became a champion for young women of intelligence who lacked opportunities to develop their minds. And if society occasionally remarked upon the Duchess's tendency toward quietness at large gatherings, they did so with respect rather than derision. For when Elena Grayson, Duchess of Westmoreland, did choose to speak, everyone listened, knowing her words would be worth hearing.